Hello and good evening. Welcome to KTN Prime. Thank you for making time for us. I'm Nancy Kachingira.
My name is Wilson Buru, and tonight it is citizen Uhuru Kenyatta, and he is at The Hague for the status conference on his case. We have that story and much more, but here are the highlights. Citizen Uhuru Kenyatta arrives at The Hague as his case enters a make-or-break moment.
And it was a busy day for William Ruto as acting president.
Also coming up, from Andrew to Audrey, landmark ruling on a transgender case.
So if you do not place your child in a child restraint, the penalty is 50,000.
And we'll tell you why you need to be careful while driving near a school.
Well, President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is now citizen Uhuru Kenyatta, is at The Hague for the status conference for his case that is ongoing at the ICC. Edith Kimani will be joining us live from The Hague and in a short while. But in the meantime, Uhuru Kenyatta departed the country to The Hague in style and fashion of a celebrity.
That's right. Right from the dress code to the reception. Well, Uhuru might have shelved the title president, but he was definitely still accorded the respect with security clearance at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, allowing his delegation a free pass. A battery of the executive and legislature and even the Kenya Airways outgoing chairman Titus Naikuni saw of the president. This as acting president William Ruto assumed his 48 hours presidential responsibilities at Harambee House. Right, we'll be bringing you more on that later. And just to remind you, Edith Kimani is at The Hague, and we'll be speaking to her a little later on. And right now, we'll go to Eldoret, where Mercy Kandia is standing by with a very interesting story, of course. This is the place that has given us a president for 48 hours.
Absolutely. If you can hear me, Mercy Kandia, very good evening to you. Could you tell us what the reactions have been throughout the village where the acting president hails from?
Yes, indeed. This Eldoret town in our Sugoi area being the home where the deputy president, now acting president, William Ruto hails from. We went to his home in Sugoi area, that is still in Uasin Gishu County, and him being the acting president currently, his home, it's business as usual. There's one GSU officer who's taking guard of the area, no one on site, people going about their own business as it's business as usual. Later on, we visited the popular town of Juakali area where now the acting president, William Ruto, grew up, and you know what they say, tried to make it, calling himself a hustler from selling chicken at the Juakali area. And we were there, a bit of excitement there, people saying that they're having their former member of parliament and their son being acting president for 48 hours. We talked to a few residents there, and this is what they had to say.
Vile naangalia vile rais alipatia vice president hiyo kiti yake, tumefurahi. Sasa inamaanisha hawa wa chama wanaelewana, na hawa ndio tunataka watu wenye wanaendelea namna hiyo. Masikia? Na vile tumeangalia vile inaendelea, Kenya inaendelea kuwa na maoni mzuri. Watakuwa na vita wakati zingine.
Tumefurahia sana, na hiyo ni ishara ya kuwa hawa wanaelewana na wako na urafiki. Na pia hiyo inaonyesha ya kuwa katika hiyo tamu zake mbili ambayo bwana Uhuru Kenyatta atamaliza, that's 2022, tunatarajia ya kuwa atapea kiti bwana Ruto. Na hapa sasa sisi wakazi wa Juakali ama Eldoret North, ambapo ilikuwa Eldoret North kitambo, tuko na trust sana kwa Ruto na tunamwamini na tunajua ya kuwa yeye ni mtu wa kusema na kutenda.
Tulifurahi. Na hata hiyo position ambayo wako nayo ile ya deputy pia hiyo ni sawa. Lakini sasa kushikilia hiyo ni lazima, kwa sababu hawezi wacha nchi hivyo.
Well, as we said earlier, Uhuru Kenyatta departed the country to The Hague in style and the fashion of a rock star, from the dress code to the reception. And he might have shelved the title president, but was still accorded respect with security clearance at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, allowing his delegation a free pass and a battery of executive legislature. And even the Kenya Airways outgoing chairman Titus Naikuni were there on hand to see him off. The president, and this as the acting president William Ruto assumed his 48 hours presidential responsibilities at Harambee House.
The president left the country in a remarkable journey, bearing the hallmarks of an elite civilian rather than a president. Uhuru drove in a convoy of 5 personal vehicles, accompanied by 3 of his bodyguards, his wife Margaret Kenyatta and daughter Angina Kenyatta, to the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Donned in jeans, a polo shirt, loafer shoes and a blazer, the country's president had undergone a full transformation. But nonetheless, Uhuru and his delegation will go through security checks, express without screening. They will sit at the Kenya Airways Business First Class VIP Lounge and not the State's VIP Lounge. Notable figures including the outgoing Kenya Airways chairman Titus Naikuni and Raphael Tuju kept Uhuru company before his departure. Cabinet secretaries, members of parliament and senators saw off the president as he jetted to The Hague. Back home, acting President William Ruto's 48 hours of power began in earnest Tuesday, and it was as presidential as it can get. The presidential convoy carrying Ruto pulled over at Harambee House with a battery of security detail in tow to protect the country's new acting chief executive. The blue presidential standard towered in Ruto's office as he adjusted to fit into his new role. Ruto was taking charge and the grip of the nation firmly within his grasp. The acting president spent the better part of his morning at Harambee House holding meetings in the absence of Uhuru Kenyatta. Ruto first met with the head of civil service Joseph Kinyua for a routine briefing before meeting a delegation of the United Nations Office for Project Services led by its executive director Grete Faremo. The delegation pledged to continue supporting government's Vision 2030 program through the United Nations Development Assistance Fund. In a separate meeting, acting president also had a brief meeting with Cabinet Secretary for Information, Communication and Technology, Fred Matiang'i, and the Konza City Board. Ruto holds brief on the presidency following an executive order by Uhuru Kenyatta invoking Article 147(3) of the Constitution, allowing him to cede power and appoint the deputy president as acting president. Samogina, KTN.
Now, the president being at The Hague is just one of the facets of this ICC discussion. Yesterday, Yvonne Okwara spoke to Maria Kamara, who is the ICC Field Outreach Coordinator for Kenya and Uganda, and she shared some insights on just how this case has affected not only the victims, but the wider community.
Just as slow at the ICC, taking a look at the record since its inception in 2002, about 12 years ago, you take a look at the successful prosecutions in at least the 9 situations that the ICC has been investigating over time, and many starting to point at that record and saying that's not a really successful track record.
What I would say, first of all, the ICC has been a very new institution trying to apply the Rome Statute as well as interpret the rules under which the court operates. But what we have to keep in mind, very importantly, is the issue of a fair trial that is required to be expeditious in the best interest of justice, taking into consideration the views, the concerns, and the interest of all the parties, meaning here the defense, the prosecution, and the lawyers for victims. While it is true that the processes may have delayed, but it is good to review, to evaluate what are some of the setbacks, what are some of the reasons why there have been a delay. The judges consider that some of these delays have been justifiable. Only when the delay is unjustifiable, this is when we start saying that the judicial process is unnecessarily slow. Yes, it has to be expeditious. It's in the Rome Statute, it's in the rules, but if the delay is necessitated to ensure that there is fairness. All parties are respected. There is due process, and the proceedings are public and free, and rights are guaranteed to the victims, to the defendant, as well as the witnesses that come to the courtroom. I will not generally conclude that the delay is undue.
Are you then worried about that agreement that came out of the extraordinary AU summit last year, where the African states were essentially telling President Kenyatta to not go to The Hague? We know that decision has already been made, but when the AU comes together, and those are 34 member states saying they do not want any sitting president to appear before The Hague, does that worry you in terms of the level of cooperation you will get from African states, many of whom the cases are still before the courts?
What is very clear is the court has received enormous support and cooperation from African states. As you mentioned, 34 of them are state parties to the Rome Statute. There have been several occasions where the court has requested African state parties to provide one support or assistance or the other as may be requested or as time may demand. So African states continue to support the work of the court. They remain state parties to the Rome Statute, and we have not had any reason so far that the court has approached a particular state where it has been refused one thing or the other. Up till now, as we speak, African states having recognition of the fact that they are parties to the Rome Statute and they have an obligation as individual state, not the collectivity of an entity, but as individual states have the obligation under the Rome Statute and under international law to fully cooperate with the ICC, not only for arresting, the obligation to provide the funding of the court, the obligation to sign agreement with the court, either for relocation of witnesses, either to use their prison services in the event of a conviction, especially now that we have quite a number of cases that have concluded.
Right. So what you're saying is you've not seen any refusal to cooperate since that decision came out of the extraordinary summit last year?
Speaking from what I know, I have not seen anything public to give the indication that African states are not very happy. Remember, last year they were in The Hague during the Assembly of State Party conference, quite a number of them, and they were pushing for one thing or the other, one of which was to amend a number of rules on the rules of procedure and evidence. If they were not cooperating with the Assembly of State Party with the ICC, I am not sure they would have attended such meetings that have to do with the ICC at the level in which they did attend. I was also there.
Finally, what's next after the status conference? Where do we go from here?
After it concludes, we would expect the judges to communicate the way forward in respect to that particular case.
Well, as we had promised you earlier, Edith Kimani is in the Netherlands. She is at The Hague, and she joins us now live from there. Edith, if you can hear me, what is the schedule? What do we expect in the next 48 hours?
Well, thank you, Wilson. I wish I could give you that answer with clarity. Unfortunately, we don't have an itinerary. What we do know for a fact is that come what may, at 10 a.m. tomorrow in the Netherlands at the International Criminal Court, Mr. Kenyatta, as we're now referring to him, will be on those steps and he will be entering the status conference. I can't tell you what Judge Kuniko Ozaki said today, who is a presiding judge. She said she will be asking specific questions to specific attorneys, which is a sort of indication that she's looking for something specific to sort of clarify the issue of cooperation between Kenya and specifically the Office of the Prosecutor at the moment. Wilson.
Well, Edith, one of the concerns that probably we should bring up is the fact that when he was traveling to The Hague, he was expected to travel as the president, but now he has traveled as a private citizen. So what has the reception been like? Was he treated as a dignitary, or was he treated like just like a normal kind of citizen?
Well, we were treated to quite a bit of fanfare this afternoon because of that, but not the kind that you would expect. It was more behind-the-scenes drama. At one point, there were senators, MPs, and other government officials settled at the airport, as were we. We were waiting for the president to arrive, and we weren't sure what terminal he would be using. There were reports that he would be using the VIP area, and then there were other reports later saying that he would be using a normal terminal, as any civilian would. And before we could figure it out, officials from the embassy asked us to vacate the premises, the airport actually, saying that President Uhuru Kenyatta had asked for no celebrations at all at the airport. And so the government officials proceeded to the hotel where he is at the moment. But later, he emerged from the VIP area. But this is what is interesting. There was evidently security, and there was certainly a lot of vehicles. But there was not the usual celebration and fanfare that we associate with the presidency. It was simply his very close family. I spotted Margaret Kenyatta there, his communication team led by Manoya Sipisu, and the vehicles, it's important to note, as many as they were in blue plates. And in the Netherlands, blue plates are an indication of hired vehicles or taxis. And it was only his personal vehicle that he was using, which had a yellow plate, which we suspect was from the embassy. So in as much as he is still the elected president of Kenya, there was hardly anything that indicated that he was the president while he was in the Netherlands. In fact, at some point, a few people asked me at the airport, who is this? Why are you following him around? That's how low-key he was. Wilson.
So no fanfare, nothing. He was a private citizen in the Hague. And as you mentioned, there were a couple of dignitaries who traveled with him, to be particular. About 120 members of parliament traveled with him to the Hague. Are they going to be allowed in court, or are they going to be watching the proceedings in their hotel rooms?
It is likely that they might end up watching the proceedings in the hotel room, because the private gallery at The Hague can only hold so many people. And as it is, there are seats which have been reserved for members of the press. There are others which have been reserved for human rights activists and what have you. So it's unlikely that each and every one of them is going to be able to witness this live, or as live as they possibly can. But we do expect to see them at least at the steps of The Hague. We didn't see any of that today. We were actually wondering if they were still around, and the only indication that there were any Kenyan officials was at the airport early this morning, when a few of them came into the country. But other than that, it's been rather quiet. Tomorrow, as you mentioned, however, we do expect to see quite a couple of them before the proceedings and after.
Edith, very last question. There was a status conference today. Would you kindly update us on what exactly happened today at the ICC?
Wilson, anyone who was following the status conference today would have a feeling of deja vu. It was very much similar to what had happened earlier in the first status conference, where Attorney General Githu Muigai appeared. It was very simply a back and forth between Attorney General Githu Muigai and the Office of the Prosecution, led by Benjamin Gumbert today. Now, Benjamin Gumbert was asked at one point, which I thought was interesting, because he keeps insisting that the Kenyan government is not providing materials. He did cite phone records. He also talked about tax returns, and he also talked about bank statements. And the judges asked him, will this evidence make your case solid? And he answered, I don't know. And I found this to be very surprising, because all along, the Office of the Prosecution has been saying this is the last puzzle that we need to seal this case. And here they were today saying, we don't know. We're simply going by 9 witness accounts who said that they were paid, who said that they were called, who said that they were given land and they were given this and that, which is an indication that if we open these files, we might find more. So that's as far as the Office of the Prosecution went today. Attorney General Githu Muigai, however, says that the Office of the Prosecution cannot keep making the Kenyan government do the investigations for them. This has been his argument all along. He repeated it again today. As it is, it remains at a deadlock. Those were the exact words of the Office of the Prosecution, and we wait to hear what the judges will say with regard to this.
Well, thank you very much, Edith, for that. We'll, of course, keep in touch with you so that you can keep us up to date on the goings-on at the ICC. That's Edith Kimani live at The Hague, where she has told us that President Uhuru Kenyatta has been treated as a normal citizen when he arrived at The Hague. No fanfare, no celebrations, and the status conference. He is expected to, of course, appear in court for the status conference on his case tomorrow at 10. We'll, of course, keep you updated as that continues. Still in the courts, but this time not the ICC. Here in Kenya, in a landmark ruling, the High Court has today ordered the Kenya National Examinations Council to issue a new certificate to a transgender activist, recognizing her identity as a woman. Audrey, who was born a man, had moved to the court seeking to compel the examination body to recognize her new name. KTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa now reports.
You know, the feeling of you are trapped in a body that doesn't belong to you.
In 2013, Audrey, a transgender activist, moved to court seeking to compel the Kenya National Examination Council to alter the name on her certificate to reflect her identity as a woman. In 2014, a court would rule in her favor. In a ruling that now sets a precedent, the High Court has ordered the Kenya National Examination Council to alter the names in the certificate from Andrew Mbugua Ithibu to Audrey Mbugua Ithibu. Audrey was born male and says that she was diagnosed with a gender identity disorder after she completed high school. She went to court challenging the examination body's failure to recognize her as a woman by failing to change her name on her certificate. NEC responded that it was cautious about issuing the certificate, stating that it was not clear whether the transition from male to female had been achieved and whether this was even legal. High Court Judge Justice Weldon Korir ordered that the certificate be printed without a gender mark, adding that the law does not require the gender mark on the certificate and the document can be regarded as complete without the mark. The Examination Council now has 45 days to replace Audrey's Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education certificate. Wilkis Tanyabwa, KTN.
Well, that story brings us to our big question tonight, and we are asking, do you support the court ruling recognizing Audrey Mbugua as a female? Do you support the court ruling? It is a landmark ruling, and do you support it? The court's ruling recognizing Audrey Mbugua as a female.
Give us your thoughts on this, and you can do that by tweeting us at Kachingira, at Wilson_Mburu, and at KTN Kenya. You can also send an SMS. When you do that, start with yes or no so that we can compile a poll result for you later, and then also send that to 22155, and we'll certainly be looking at some of your feedback later on. Now, this is, of course, as you said, a very interesting case. One of the things that the High Court ruled was that marks are not awarded by gender, and so they didn't necessarily see a problem with actually directing the National Examinations Council to change that gender mark on her certificate.
So which now brings us to, does this now set a precedent for future cases which might actually come up at the High Court or such?
Well, that is a good question. But right now, we've got Audrey Mbugua herself at our city centre studio, and we're definitely going to ask her a couple of questions. Good evening to you, Audrey. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, everyone is calling this a landmark ruling, but what does it mean for you specifically?
It means that transgender people can now have an opportunity to live dignified lives. They have an opportunity to get out of poverty, and we have to exert more effort in our advocacy work.
So you're looking at this as not just something for you, but for transgender people in general. Do you have a group, a support group? Are there many of you? How many do you think there are?
I don't have a figure of the entire transgender community in Kenya, but at the moment we have a support group, and we have an organization that we are in the process of registration, and we currently have over 60 members across Kenya. And I don't have the number of transgender people in Kenya.
Right, but you think there could be about 60 of you here in your group, as you say. Well, yeah. Now, you have won a couple of legal battles. Earlier in July, you were allowed by the High Court to register your group. Now you're winning this one that allows you to change the gender mark on your certificate. But do you feel that this is going to help in terms of the society accepting the transgender community?
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, we have already had a lot of changes within the society, within some government institutions, within the private sector, with regard to how they treat transgender people. We have had parents of transgender people wanting information on how their kids can lead normal lives. It's a process.
And where does this process end up? I mean, recently in India, they actually recognized that there's male, female, and transgender. Is that the kind of fight that you're fighting for? Are you fighting for people to be able to choose whether they're male or female?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
So you would want Kenya to recognize that there is male, female, and transgender?
Yeah, because there are people who don't neatly fall in the male or female categories. There are others in unique situations, and I think with the society, we need to accommodate them and ensure that the development of our country is based on inclusion of everyone.
So what's next for you? First of all, as Audrey the activist, having gained this significant ground, where do you plan to go from here?
I don't think it's me who did it. It's so many people. So many people provided a lot of support. So it's not just a win for Audrey, but now we have to move to the process of implementing or enforcing those orders. But they might appeal, you never know. But we hope that they won't be resistant to those orders. We hope that the government, all the government departments will start to look into these issues with a lot of objectivity, that the society will stop rushing to judge, and people will take time to learn about things before they have those strong convictions about issues.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Audrey. That was Audrey Mbugua. Her plea is that people do not rush to judgment. As we told you earlier on, the High Court did rule that the Kenya National Examination Council comply with her desire to be recognized as a woman. And remember, on our big question, we're asking you whether you agree with that decision. Keep your feedback coming. As we move on, though, there is a rising concern about the number of children being killed or injured on Kenyan roads. According to the International Institute for Legislative Affairs, 10,000 children have been killed on Kenyan roads in the last decade alone. Consequently, the organization is drumming up support for plans to amend the Traffic Act in order to introduce a 30 kilometer per hour speed limit on all roads in the vicinity of schools.
About 70% of school-going children in Kenya walk to school. This has seen some of them become victims of road carnage. The Member of Parliament for Laisamis, Joseph Lekuton, has proposed amendments to the Traffic Act to ensure safety for children using Kenyan roads. The Traffic Amendment Bill 2014 proposes a speed limit of 30 kilometers per hour for roads within the boundaries of a nursery, primary and secondary school. The speed limit will also apply to a section of any road ordinarily used by children when crossing to or from school, as may be designated as a pedestrian crossing. The International Institute for Legislative Affairs is urging members of parliament to safeguard the future generation by supporting the bill.
The reduction of speed around schools at 30 kilometers per hour. The current legislation, the Traffic Act, provides that speed around built-up areas, and you would assume that a good number of the schools would be in built-up areas, is set at 50 kilometers per hour.
Penalties have been proposed for motorists who will be booked for exceeding speed limits. For instance, a fine of 10,000 shillings will be imposed for exceeding the limit by between 5 to 10 kilometers per hour. Driving between 51 to 60 kilometers an hour on roads near or at the boundaries of schools will attract a fine of 20,000 shillings, while speeding at 61 kilometers or more will attract a fine of 25,000 shillings. If passed, school transport vehicles will be fitted with child safety equipment, safety features, and not carry excess children. Vehicles carrying children under the age of 8 years shall be fitted with child restraint seats. The school administration will be liable in the event of failure to ensure the vehicles are safe for child transport. School transport vehicles will also not be allowed to operate between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.
So what the bill does is to provide for one that you go to court, you have 48 hours within which to actually go to court.
You find the whole body is ripped off and passengers are thrown. Why? Probably the bodybuilders never followed the set standards.
The bill obligates the Highway Authority to erect and maintain traffic signs near schools indicating the 30 kilometers per hour speed limits. Other speed calming measures proposed include constructing speed bumps or rumble strips and traffic circles on the roads near schools. The Highway Authority should also ensure roads in the vicinity of schools have safety features such as wide pavements, footpaths, cycle tracks, barriers, pedestrian crossings, underpasses and footbridges. Patrick Amimo, KTN.
Well, the High Court has ordered the Kenya National Examinations Council to recognize Audrey Mbugua as female. And in our big question tonight, we're asking you, do you support that High Court ruling acknowledging Audrey Mbugua as a female?
That's right. In our discussion with her a few minutes ago, she said ultimately their fight is that Kenya is able to recognize that there is male, female, and transgender. Well, let us know your thoughts, and you can do that by sending us a tweet at Kachingira, at Wilson_Mburu, at KTN Kenya. You can also send us an SMS, 22155, and share your thoughts with us. Do you have anything there, Wilson?
I can see a couple of tweets here coming in. There's one here from Ambuli Victor, who says yes, since it will set a precedent for the possible transgender issues in their posterity.
Okay. There's one here that simply says no, you're either male or female, and that's it.
Gerard Njero says she should have stuck to her for male gender.
Female gender. I think that was supposed to be.
Well, thank you very much for your feedback. Continue sending us those tweets, those SMSs. We'll, of course, sample some of your views and give you a poll result at the end of this live newscast. As for now, we take a short break. Don't you go away. We have much more coming after that. Welcome back. You're watching KTN Prime.
Well, unfortunately, tens of pupils and students in Turkana County are missing out on school as the drought situation worsens.
This is occasioned by the fact that many parents move with their children in search of pasture.
And as Catherine Omwando reports, school feeding programs may be one strategy that can keep children in school.
These are the children left at KTN Primary School. A number of pupils have not turned up since the drought began. The only way to make them stay is to provide food. However, these public schools don't have the funds and must rely on organizations such as the Child Welfare Society of Kenya to provide food to the pupils. Child Welfare Society hopes to provide food to 10,200 pupils and students of 19 schools in northern Kenya as the drought continues to bite. Meanwhile, elected leaders have condemned the killing of 13 people since February this year at the border of West Pokot and Turkana County.
We want to challenge the security agencies and tell them, and particularly NIS, to tell us who are in Kainuk. We are getting worried ourselves, and we don't want Beketoni. We don't want Beketoni in our place. And let them be aware. Let the security agencies be aware. If the common man, mwananchi ya kawaida, knows that there is a problem in Kainuk, where are the security agencies?
The leaders believe the nature of the killings are suspicious and not as a result of armed banditry in the area.
Hii killings sio ile ya wizi, ndio msituletee habari ya kusema hii ni wizi ya ng'ombe ya kawaida. La. Unaweza kuexplain aje mtoto anakamatwa na kufungwa juu ya miti msichana na kunyongwa na kukata rituals. Kijana anakatwa shingo na kuacha panga ya special type of weapon. We associate this type of killings with what we are seeing Al-Shabaab doing.
The national government has been alerted of the situation. However, leaders say nothing has been done to put an end to the violence. Catherine Omwando, KTN.
Next on KTN Prime, it's time for business. Joy Doreen Bira is in our business studio for that. Good evening, Joy.
Good evening, Nancy. And yes, business is coming up shortly. And we're going to be telling you how the Kenya Revenue Authority says large multinationals have taken advantage of the country's weak tax laws to transfer money back to their home countries, and how this is affecting the economy. We'll let you know in a short while. Laws to transfer the proceeds gained in Kenya to their home countries. And as Adelaide Changole reports, KRA is now turning up the heat on the cash-rich multinationals for what it terms as a grand tax evasion.
Kenya's strategic location at the center of the continent, its proximity to Europe, and its position as a gateway into the East and Central African markets has made the country a hotspot for multinationals looking to set up their offices in Africa. But while this is mostly a good development, it has come with a downside.
We have companies in Kenya who've been in operation for even 30 years, but they have never paid tax in Kenya, just because they're able to arrange their affairs in a way that no profit will accrue to the Kenyan entity.
And this has cost the country a pretty penny over the years as companies shift profits out of Kenya to areas with lower tax jurisdictions.
We have made adjustments totaling to over 30 billion Kenya shilling on transfer pricing issues alone.
The situation was worsened by the previous model used to negotiate double tax agreements, which favored developed countries over developing countries, allowing companies to exploit resources in Kenya and then remit profits to other countries in the name of avoiding double taxation. Now, however, the country has adopted a different model that is fairer to developing countries and is looking to correct mistakes made in the past.
We are currently negotiating some of the treaties so that we can have our fair share of profit.
The Kenya Revenue Authority has also set up a transfer pricing department that has so far undertaken audits of 40 multinationals in the country, which has yielded not just tax justice, but is also setting a trend for future engagements with multinationals.
The most important thing in audit is impact. Audit few companies, send the right message out there to drive compliance. That's what we do. So we may not audit very, very many companies, but the few we audit, basically will be able to set a good example to others so that they can comply.
At the same time, players in the private sector are urging the state to extend double tax agreements beyond the 10 countries presently having treaties to increase trade and reduce cases of double taxation. The country is working on tax treaties with Seychelles, South Africa, Russia, Spain, Nigeria, Finland, South Korea, United Arab Emirates, and Iran. Adelaide Changole, KTN Business.
CIC Insurance has announced an 111% of a subscription of its medium-term NOT program, raising 6.3 billion shillings over the initial issue of 3 billion Kenya shillings. According to CIC Group CEO Nelson Kuria, the funds raised are expected to transform business objectives like real estate business, regional expansion to South Sudan, Uganda, Malawi, as well as target new markets such as the micro-insurance sector. CIC will add an additional 2 billion shillings from the total amount raised in a bond to be listed at the Nairobi Securities Exchange on October 15th. And dairy farmers will in future be paid according to the quality of milk they sell rather than by the quantity they deliver. The move announced by the Kenya Dairy Board follows the adulteration of milk that has been rife in the industry, compromising the milk sold to consumers. Philip Ketan with the details.
Kenya's dairy sector has grown by leaps and bounds over the years. The sector now produces 3.2 billion liters milk annually that has seen processors even serve the regional market. But with the lure of big returns, milk processors have raised the red flag over farmers who have begun adulterating their milk to boost volumes and get a higher return. Farmers have been found to be adding water and butter to their milk to increase the volume and fat content over the milk, prompting the Kenya Dairy Board to introduce the new payment term for farmers.
The farmers will be paid based on quality.
in terms of the quality of your product, in terms of the chemical quality, in terms of the biological quality, and in terms of protein content, butterfat content, all those, then you are paid 50% comes from the volume and 50% comes from the quality of your milk.
Approximately 600,000 smallholder farmers produce an estimated 75% of Kenya's milk supply. The quality of both formal and informal marketed milk in Kenya does not meet the Kenya national quality standards, and bacterial growth occurs before farmers sell their milk. The new mode of payment is now meant to encourage farmers to improve the quality of milk in the market. The announcement comes as the Dairy Board launches the second phase of processed milk consumption campaign, aimed at encouraging Kenyans to consume processed milk. The move is aimed at discouraging consumption of hawked milk that has seen most milk processing plants work below capacity.
In phase 2, we are coming out more and saying, yes, consume milk, but not just milk. It has to be processed and it has to be hygienic.
The need, therefore, to have the milk get to the consumers quickly cannot be overemphasized. However, this is complicated by the fact that the distance involved in ferrying the milk from farms to consumers is usually long, and many consumers always end up with coagulated milk. Philip Keitan, KTN Business.
The lapsset Corridor Development Authority is eyeing the capital markets as a major tool to raise close to 2 billion shillings to finance facets of the project. This comes as the Nairobi Securities Exchange is positioning itself to play a bigger role in mobilizing resources for major development projects. The authority has so far invested 9.4 billion shillings in study and groundwork planning, and the new capital will help lay basic infrastructure. KTN's Charles Kitonga with the details.
Lapsset Corridor. The Lamu Port South Sudan Ethiopia Transport Corridor project is a mammoth project to say the least. At 2.5 trillion shillings, the sheer size of the project has got tongues wagging as to how exactly the government will pull off the financing. But as it would appear, the Lapsset Corridor Development Authority is thinking outside the box, as it were, on how to raise the capital.
And we've seen through the stock exchange how KTN, Safaricom and the others showed that there is actually capacity within the country, whether you're talking about pension funds and the like, and all this to be given a chance to take part will require that we go through the Nairobi Stock Exchange.
For the authority, it's all about making the project as investor-friendly as possible by laying the preparatory work. With the money raised, the authority plans to construct 3 out of the 32 envisioned berths, as well as put up the road linking to Ethiopia and South Sudan. According to the Director General, this is expected to whet investors' appetite to be part of the project.
Private sector usually fears greenfield projects due to perhaps the capital outlay that is required and the long gestation period that infrastructure projects usually yield, in terms of returns.
The Nairobi Securities Exchange has also confirmed that it has capacity to raise the desired capital, with more than 4 trillion shillings needed to finance energy, transport and infrastructure projects across the country.
At least now we have the private sector, we have bonds, we can be able to raise money in the market.
Various private investors, among them Centum Investment, are also charting the course in tapping the capital markets to raise funds. Centum is seeking to raise 177 billion shillings for the 970 megawatt coal plant in Lamu, with the NSE being its primary source for capital. Charles Gitonga, KTN.
Right, welcome to KTN's welcome to KTN Sports. Improving Kenya's fading rankings in the world and exposing the youthful players in his camp will be Coach Bobby Williamson's agenda when he takes Harambee Stars to Morocco for a friendly this weekend. Kenya's absence in African football has cost the country a great deal, as Kenya dropped 7 places to position 111 in last month's world rankings. Victor Gali reports from Kasarani.
When Harambee Stars was bundled out of the Morocco 2015 Africa Cup of Nations contention, it meant that Kenya will be out of competitive football until the end of the year, when the Sekafa Senior Challenge Cup will take place. But when the opportunity to engage Harambee Stars during the FIFA week came knocking, it provided an opportunity for Bob Williamson to start building a new team.
The result maybe not so important, but it's the performances that really matter. And as I said, me and Mister will have a look at everybody to see how they conduct themselves when they travel.
Na hii team si eti ya ule coach kwa hapa ama ni federation, sisi ni wa Kenya na nafikiria lazima tutukubali, lazima tuwe na new challenges.
Nelson Simwa of second tier league side West Kenya Sugar is among such beneficiaries, having earned his first call-up into the national team after a 4-year wait since he began playing soccer at Western Stima.
Tumewa text naambiwa kwamba congratulations. Sasa sikuwa najielewa wakati nilipofuatilia sana hizo congratulations za nini, naambiwa kwamba hujasoma futa.com umeitwa national team.
Coach Williamson may also need to scratch his head in coming up with a final squad of forwards following the withdrawal of Elmerex striker Alan Wanga, who has a main cup final next week. Tusker FC's lethal striker Jesse Were is nursing a leg injury he picked off the weekend in their 1-0 victory over Mathare United. Ironically, Dennis Oguta Oliechu was not called into the team, attended Tuesday's training session. The team, which will be further trimmed to 19 players, will leave the country on Friday the 10th before the match on the 13th of this month. The Morocco friendly will be the second match for coach Bobby Williamson as he seeks to bring a new breath of life into the Kenyan soccer scene. Victor Ogale, KTN, at the Kasarani Stadium, Nairobi.
Still on football matters, and Muhoroni Youth have appealed the Premier League's disciplinary committee to hasten judgment on an appeal it lodged with the organization after AFC Leopards fans attacked its players and destroyed the team bus. Muhoroni estimates that the damage AFC fans caused to its property and the accruing hospital bills for its players and officials amounts to about 500,000 shillings and wants full compensation. The match, played in early September, ended in a barren draw but was interrupted by crowd trouble with AFC hooligans causing havoc as AFC played host.
Because the players went into the field and the violence started before the match. They were disoriented psychologically, and actually their concentration in the field was not there, because after being beaten by the fans, they lost their focus, they lost their psychological and emotional ability to play a meaningful game to bring maximum 3 points. So any justice that has always been delayed, people will always suspect flaws.
Well, it's time to close the bulletin, but not before we remind you of our big question tonight, where we did ask you whether you support the High Court's ruling that acknowledges Audrey Mbogwa as a female. Due to technical difficulties, we cannot give you the poll results, but we'll read through a couple of your tweets. Bernard Kimuria Martin Heya says, yes, she has a right, but I do not understand at all about her condition.
Okay, one here from Mussolini. He says no, because it is not natural. Why didn't God create Adam, Eve, and Audrey?
Mohammed Yusuf says yes, of course. If that is his or her will, then why deny her?
And there's another yes here from Bernard Emuria. He says she has a right. Oh, sorry. That's one we saw. But this other one comes from Odila Odero. He says yes, it's a great achievement, especially towards stigma towards LGBTs. George
Ngugi here is says that's her private life and does not matter to ordinary Kenyans.
And finally, a no here from Ms. Kiringo, who says the High Court decision is a landmark decision and a huge win for human rights.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for all your responses. Thank you very much for joining us on KTN Prime. My name is Wilson Mburu. See you tomorrow. Have a good night.
I'm Nancy Kachungiro. We're glad you could join us tonight. Our sign language interpreter this evening was William Silla. From the KTN News Center, it's good night for now. See you tomorrow.